Good afternoon, everyone. It's a louder mic than I thought. Hello. I want to welcome the folks who are in the audience here at the Irvine Foundation, our San Francisco office. I want to thank everybody who's able to watch this streaming and folks who might watch it after the event. Good afternoon. I'm Don Howard. Thanks for coming. Appreciate your interest in the topic. I have the privilege of leading the James Irvine Foundation. And for folks who don't know us, we're a private, independent foundation, no company, no family relationship. And our singular focus is on California. And so for folks who follow philanthropy, you kind of get a sense of what we're able to do. We also have one singular goal, which is ensuring that every low-income California worker has the power to advance economically. So we're distinct in that all of our grant-making initiatives are pointed toward that same goal, which is about recapturing the California and the American dream. So I want to thank you for coming out. I want to thank our panelists. Folks have busy schedules. Thanks for sharing your time. I want to thank CalMatters for hosting the event. It's important to know that this is CalMatters event. We're privileged to be able to help support CalMatters in their work, and we're happy to provide the space. But this is entirely organized by CalMatters as a grantee. And we're grateful to do so because journalism and events are super important in spotlighting solutions and spurring conversations and connections. We really need those connections and conversations, and we need the solutions to create good jobs for low-income Californians. For folks who don't know, 1 out of every 3 California workers is paid low wages. They lack benefits, control over their schedules, and advancement opportunities. So we need more equitable paths to the middle class if the California dream is going to be a reality for everyone. Employers play a critical role in that, and that's why we're grateful to support reporting events and other efforts that identify and lift up solutions that employers are using to create good jobs for Californians. We call them high road employers and good jobs. And that's super important. We recognize that our goal of ensuring that every California worker has the power to advance economically, there are 2 sides to that coin. Workers need to be empowered. We need protections. We need wages. We also need job creation. And especially here in California where job creation can be tough. So we're proud as Irvine to be able to support efforts like this, to lift up what's working, and also to support efforts to understand what's making it hard to grow good jobs in California and what philanthropy can do to support organizations that are trying to make this a great state for good businesses and high road employers. So with that, let me turn it over to Neil Chase of CalMatters. Really appreciate your leadership, Neil, and your whole team.
Thanks, Don, thank you. I can't tell you how special it is to be here at Irvine. You know, when Don took over Irvine and the strategy turned toward that message he just described to you about lower income workers having a pathway, every time we talk about this old-fashioned structure we have in journalism of beats, we have the economy beat and the schools beat and the housing beat, when you look across them, it is all the same story, and this is the story, right? How do people create that life that people used to come to California for, the California dream? Right, come here and have a wonderful middle-class life, and now people have to work really hard at 3 jobs to get there. That's what a lot of our reporting is about. It's a lot of what the conversations are about, whether you're talking about early childhood through K-12, through college, community college training, apprenticeships, workforce programs. And so we have started to get a better sense that these kinds of stories are a theme to everything we do across all of our beats. We're grateful to Irvine and the Smith Foundation for supporting an entire body of work we're doing on what's working in California, what is leading to some of these pathways, and what kind of successes are we having, what's not working, what do we need to learn from. If you don't know CalMatters, we're a nonprofit news organization based in Sacramento, 90 people across the state, covering a lot of the issues that are most important to Californians that don't get a lot of attention because we all pay perhaps too much attention to the national story. Not too much, but it gets a lot of attention. And a lot of us know something about local politics, but that state money is so important. What happens in the state government is so important. $300 billion a year going through there, and until 10 years ago when CalMatters was founded, there were very few journalists there covering it. And so we're thrilled to be able to do this work. We think it's important. We couldn't do it without Smith and Irvine and the other folks who support us. Very grateful to them. And especially grateful to our journalists, including Levi Sumagaisai, who's going to take the lead on this panel, bring up our panelists, and get us started. I'm going to get out of your way.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? All right, thank you, Neil. I'd like to call our panelists up here. I just want to say hello and welcome to all of you who are here and to those of you who are watching us online. Today we're going to talk about apprenticeships and other work pathways in this economy where it's becoming more apparent that not everyone wants to go to college or can go to college, right? Or maybe they do have college degrees, but they need new training and skills. So the people we have on this panel are the experts who are facilitating some of that. I want to introduce, in order of who's sitting right next to me, is Orion Willis. He is with the Tech SF initiative of San Francisco's Office of Economic and Workforce Development. We have Megan Nazarino. She's the Senior Program and Data Manager at the Construction Trades Workforce Initiative in the East Bay. We have Adele Burns. She is a Deputy Chief of the California Division of Apprenticeship Standards. And we have Burton Maharja, who is the Director of Global Education Initiatives at SEMI Foundation, which is the nonprofit arm of SEMI that focuses on workforce development programs. So these are great experts. I'm so thankful that they said yes. And I am going to ask each of you to please take 1 minute to introduce yourself, sort of summarize what it is that you do, and maybe also quickly say one specific thing you're most excited to talk about today. So, Orion.
All right, thank you. Can you guys hear me? Thank you, Levy. Orion Willis, as she said, Office of Economic and Workforce Development. I manage the Tech SF initiative, and I'm also one of the founding members of the Northern California Apprentice Network. Been working on workforce development here in the Bay Area for 14 years, and the thing I'm most excited about right now is obviously apprenticeship. It is National Apprenticeship Week, the 10th anniversary, so excited to be here. Thank you.
Megan.
Hi everyone, my name is Megan Nazarino. I'm with Construction Trades Workforce Initiative, or CTWI for short. We're the workforce development nonprofit for the Building Trades Council over on the East Bay. So that means we represent over 20 construction unions in terms of their workforce development efforts, their programs that serve community members, policy that advocates for quality jobs, and high road employment that sustains a strong construction labor force. Our purpose as an organization is to increase access to union construction careers, especially for those who have been historically underrepresented, like women, people of color, youth, and the formerly incarcerated. So happy to be here. Oh, and the thing that I'm most excited about today is just to kind of highlight the concerted effort that the trades are kind of leading in terms of leveraging educational institutions, public agencies, different grants to really strengthen the pipeline for community members entering the construction trades. I'll talk a little bit more about that in my speech, but there's a strong regional effort to really get more middle-class construction careers for Californians.
Great. Good morning, folks. I am Adele Burns. I am the Deputy Chief at California's Division of Apprenticeship Standards, and right now I'm overseeing all apprenticeship for the state of California, and we are the body that all of the different programs and apprentices are registered with. So we're the registration entity for the state of California. And a lot of my work has been really focused on the expansion of high quality and equitable apprenticeships. So what that means is both the expansion of apprenticeship into a lot of different sectors, which I'm sure we'll hear about here today, tech, semiconductors, healthcare, education, basically we're trying to create this earn and learn pathway into every sector of our economy. And we're also really thinking about equitable apprenticeship, so supporting and building upon a lot of what you just talked about in terms of improving representation in the trades. So things that I'm excited to talk about today certainly echo the sentiment of celebrating the 10th annual National Apprenticeship Week. So very timely to be having this conversation, and so excited to be celebrating with you all. And two big topics that I'm certainly talking about a bunch this week is some announcements that we're making around the apprenticeship innovation funding, which I'll be happy to talk about later, and also the next round of the equal representation in construction apprenticeship grants. So those are some things I'm excited about.
Great, and hi everybody. My name is Burton and I represent Semi Foundation, so I direct education initiatives for the workforce arm of an industry association that represents about 3,100 member companies worldwide, all up and down the semiconductor and electronics manufacturing chain. Yeah, we are trying to respond in all of our different regions to the various versions of the Chips and Science Act that's been passed here, and responding to the growth that this industry is seeing and is going to continue to see because of geopolitical tensions, focus on national security, but it's all rolled up also into an economic and workforce development plan. So we're trying to bring that all together and try to lift up programming that our member companies can't do alone and need to do together. So super fortunate to be up here with the esteemed panel, and then I think the thing that I'm looking most forward to is we're kind of the younger sibling as far as a sector in apprenticeships, and we've learned so much from the apprenticeship community in California, and I'm looking forward to doing a little bit more of that today.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for those quick intros. I want to start by asking Megan, can you give us a quick overview of the apprenticeships in the construction industry? Is it fair to say that apprenticeships are back?
Long story short, yes. And this panel right here is a testament to that. And quick overview, well, this started over a century ago. Construction trades have been around for a long time. The apprenticeship, I think, programs for the construction trades were formalized over a century ago. But if you're not from the industry, you may not know that there are different specialties within the construction trades. There's such a thing as a sprinkler fitter, there's such a thing as a cement mason or an iron worker. So there's kind of this misconception that a construction worker does it all, but there's actual specialties that you can't pick up in a day, you can't pick up from watching a YouTube video, but all of these trades require proper training and special training where it's just not in a classroom. Like, you need to be on the job site with an instructor or a journeyman to show you how to actually do your work properly and safely. So the construction trades have apprenticeship programs that are anywhere between 3 to 5 years long. They're getting both classroom training and on-the-job training. And in some cases, they're also getting a college degree, like an associate's degree. Like every other apprenticeship here, they are the earn while you learn model. So in the Bay Area, on average, an apprentice makes $26 an hour, plus healthcare and retirement benefits. And as apprentices level up, as they pass their classes and get more job hours, they actually get wage increases over time. And once they journey out or complete their apprenticeship, they could be making a 6-figure salary, and that's without a college degree. So there are a lot of benefits here, and most people nowadays aren't learning about apprenticeship in high school or wherever they're at. So it's really good that we're kind of promoting it this week.
Real quick before I pose the same question to Adele, what about pre-apprenticeships? Can you talk a little bit about what that means?
Yes. So historically, construction unions haven't been the most diverse field. So pre-apprenticeship programs were established to provide more on-ramps to construction union apprenticeship programs. So these on-ramps provide holistic training, so aligned with the apprenticeship programs and with industry, but they also provide all the supportive services that a lot of these community members need. So that could be transportation stipends, that could be childcare stipends, that could be mental health support. So these pre-apprenticeship programs are designed with the construction industry or whatever industry in mind, and also with the community in mind. So making sure that we're meeting where the people are at.
Thank you. Adele, I want to ask you the same questions. One, are apprenticeships back? And two, I know that Governor Newsom a few years ago set a goal of the state trying to get to 500,000 apprenticeships by 2029. Is that correct? Are we on track for that?
Yes. So yes, obviously apprenticeships are back. You know what my answer to that question is going to be. No, but I think that they're really expanding in a big way, and I think that we're very much building off of the learnings of a long-established system with the construction trades. Right now in California, there are about 94,000 active apprentices right now, and people often hear apprenticeship and think construction, but actually only 60,000 of those are in the building trades. 10,000 of them are in what's called the fire trades, which is the California Firefighters has the single largest apprenticeship program in the entire country. It's 10,000 apprentices. But what I find really fascinating about that one is that half of them are EMTs and paramedics. So that's actually a demonstration of how we're really using apprenticeship at scale in the healthcare industry already. But what's really cool and some exciting trends I'm seeing is that more and more in the care economy, both healthcare and education, we're seeing this apprenticeship mechanism be introduced and to create a true earn and learn pathway into careers in the care economy. So right now there's about 20,000 active apprentices who are in all the other sectors, right? So not building trades, not fire trades, but everything else, and certainly education, advanced manufacturing, healthcare, transportation. These are all areas that we're seeing really significant growth in apprenticeships. And Governor Newsom's goal is to serve 500,000 apprentices by 2029. So he set that goal in 2018. So that's when we set the benchmark of, okay, how many people are we serving with the apprenticeship system? And we're approaching 200,000, which according to my forecasting is on target, if a little ahead. So to your question of are we on target? Yes, we are. And that's really partly due to some pretty major investments that were made back in 2022 into apprenticeship expansion, the apprenticeship innovation funding, the California Opportunity Youth Apprenticeship Grants, the California Apprenticeship Initiative Grants. So these are all really important investments into helping programs both get started and also be able to sustain and scale. So I think all of these have been really significant and important parts of trying to build out the system, right? Because with apprenticeship, it takes bringing together educators with employers to say, okay, how are we going to work together to prepare this workforce, and bringing together the organized labor that's representing those workers to make sure that they're supported through the journey. And so again, so much of this is learning off of the incredibly strong foundations of apprenticeship in the building trades and applying those learnings in a whole lot of different sectors. And of course, it's going to look a little different in the semiconductor industry than in preparing K-12 teachers than it will be for preparing nurses. But it's all possible to be applying this mechanism of earning and learning to get into this really wide array of careers.
Sure. And speaking of industries and manufacturing, Burton, would you tell us real quick, can you talk about the semi-foundation shift from, I believe it started as an organization that focused on STEM in high schools, to workforce development. Why did the foundation change its focus?
That's a great question. So it tracks a little bit with my career growth as well. I was brought into the semi-foundation. I started in the K-12 system, not as a registered apprenticeship, but as a teacher on an intern credential. So essentially a similar earn and learn pathway for me. It's starting my career in education. It's a small world. A board member at a former district of mine, Chris Thompson, is here. So we got to catch up a little bit, but that's where I cut my teeth. And then I got brought into the semi-foundation developing our K-12 programs. So in a time during COVID and distance learning, how do we scale what we do? And this is an organization that's been around since about 2000. So in its 20th or so year, they had to really shift what we were doing from doing 3-day STEM programs, to your point, trying to figure out how to scale, right? Hitting 400 students a year, drop in the bucket. How do we hit multiple thousands in a year, which we are right now? But then the CHIPS and Science Act happened. And that meant that as part of a team of 4, trying to respond to I can't even imagine how big this investment is federally, right? We had to really grow and figure out in what ways do we invest to create pathways for workers and packaged it in a way that our member companies and industry will buy into. So that's how we've kind of pivoted and grown, and it's been a lot of learning through this growth, some growing pains for sure, but all of that has been lifted by support from, like I mentioned, the apprenticeship community here in California, right? We are a grantee of Irvine. We're super grateful for them not only hosting, but also supporting our work. And we've learned through the programs that we've built what may resonate with industry and what doesn't, because it all starts and ends with that demand from industry. So we are very lucky to be able to have a registered apprenticeship program in partnership with Foothill College. We're working on one with Mission. They are supported by the California Apprenticeship Initiatives funds both. And we are also trying to expand apprenticeships through our work with Irvine, but also have a grant through the California Workforce Development Board, where we're trying to build not necessarily registered apprenticeships, but other opportunities to get entry-level workers into the advanced manufacturing and semiconductor field, where it's an invisible industry that's very local. And when I talk to my former students about what the Silicon Valley means, they can tell me Meta, Apple, and Google. But it's so hard for them to see what underlies all of that, what enables that in the Silicon Valley, and where did that term come from. So trying to build that awareness of the pathways within an industry that is in their backyard.
For those who may not know, what kinds of jobs are we talking about here in in semiconductor manufacturing?
Yeah, so...
And how much can people make?
Yes, so when we're talking about starting, it tracks to what we're talking about mid-20s for our apprenticeship program. But what type of job? So probably the biggest company that we have a registered apprenticeship with right now is called Applied Materials. They create, so if you're gonna take a baking analogy to creating semiconductor chips, they create the ovens that make the bread. So they create the equipment that helps you make the chips. And for those jobs, there's what's called a process technician. So you're working with the actual process of what's happening in this machine. And then you get to know that machine, and intimately you're working with the engineer to be able to implement whatever process it is that's happening on that machine. There's also equipment maintenance technician. So if you're really great at working with your hands, you're mechanically inclined, maybe you're coming out of an auto CTE program, you can use those skills in a clean room environment and be able to make sure that your machines stay up and they stay running, because a lot of our chip and device manufacturers, they work 2 or 3 shifts a day. So we're talking about 24-hour cycles. Any downtime is lost time, and they're trying to make sure that they're doing preventative maintenance as well as taking care of those fires when they happen. So those are some big buckets. There's lots of other pieces that need to happen. Semiconductor, not particularly the cleanest industry, right? So there's a lot of abatement work that happens. So if you have HVAC skills, that's needed in this industry as well, working on systems that keep our environment healthy and our communities healthy.
Thank you, and Orion. So TechSF provides free training and certifications. What has been most successful so far? Can you talk a little bit about some of the public-private partnerships that you are working on?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think, with me, all roads lead to apprenticeships, so I'm going to kind of end up there. But we started TechSF in 2012 under the late, great Ed Lee. And there was some general funds he had set aside to provide for training locals to break into the tech industry. There was we're going through the second tech boom, and a lot of those jobs being created were not being offered to locals, and specifically those underrepresented in tech. So we started TechSF in 2012. And we had a long history of training people and placing them, but there was always a segment of our population that was not getting job offers. And so we went after an apprenticeship grant, because what we were hearing from industry was that, yeah, the training's good, but they don't have enough practical application. So in 2016, we got an apprenticeship grant, and it took a few years to really get it off the ground and develop a proof of concept. But as soon as we did, we then had industry champions that we could point to and say, look at the outcomes that we've developed with this program. And fast forward to today, we have 12 different occupations that we can offer through our standards agreement. And we've apprenticed, a couple hundred people. It's not huge numbers, but all of those graduates have went through just life-changing experiences. And none of them would be working in tech today without apprenticeship. And a lot of them couldn't afford to stay in the Bay Area. So, and then the other piece is we started the Northern California Apprentice Network a couple of years ago. And that was based on the Chicago Apprentice Network, where you take a bunch of workforce development practitioners, professionals, community-based organizations, community colleges, and bring everyone together to just kind of evangelize the model of apprenticeship. And through kind of peer pressure, things happen. And so that has scaled significantly. I mean, Adele was one of the founding members as well. We just had a big event yesterday, and so I think it's not a huge investment to bring people together and just kind of share knowledge, but the dividends are really there. So.
And what kind of jobs are we talking about?
Yeah, so within our standards agreement, we do everything from like an IT generalist or a digital marketer all the way up to a data scientist, and kind of a lot of roles in between. But within the Northern California Apprentice Network, we're industry agnostic. So those are businesses, I mean, SEMI's a member, everything basically outside of the traditional construction and building trades, and that's not by design, it's just because you guys have it figured out.
And Orion, like, how are companies responding? Are you seeing sort of a shift in thinking? Are companies more responsive to programs like this?
Yeah, I think, if you were to look at when we first started pitching tech apprenticeships 7 or 8 years ago, it really fell on deaf ears. And today you have household name companies that are advertising their apprenticeship programs on LinkedIn. And so again, we can point to these, FANG companies and say, like, they're doing it, so you could be doing it too. And in tech, there's this funny thing where, like, either you're the first mover or you want to see someone else try it and then, get the feedback and then you try it yourself. And I think we're at a point now where most companies are familiar with the term apprenticeship, and, based on a level of kind of technical assistance and dissecting the model with them, you can get them to a point where they're probably ready to pilot it if it makes sense financially, right? And yeah, there's a little more to that. But.
Anyone else on the panel have, want to weigh in on why companies seem to be more receptive now, or are, a little bit more accepting of apprenticeships?
I mean, I'm happy to kick us off. What I would say is that when you're struggling to fill the roles in your organization, you are willing to think differently about the talent pipeline. And that is definitely a trend that we've seen across the board over the past 5 years or so, is that there's been a real talent squeeze. I think some of that is shifting and adjusting today, and certainly differently in different sectors. And what I'm definitely, I mentioned earlier about the care economy, I think that is certainly a corner of our economy where there's a real, like, desperation for good people. We need more nurses, we need more teachers, we need more there's entire new occupations, like community health worker is an entirely new occupation that's being created in the state of California to really provide that, care at the initial level, so that we're caring for people before it gets acute, right? And so there are significant areas, and of course in like semiconductors, like areas where we know we're really trying to build the workforce out, and it's not happening. Like, you can't just buy the talent off the market, right? I think a lot of companies are starting to think differently about how they address the talent, and recognizing, okay, we as a company need to play a role in developing this talent pipeline. And yes, educators play a role, but we want to get somebody working as quickly as possible, right? And that's what happens with an apprenticeship. You recognize that you're hiring somebody who is greener, who doesn't quite have the experience, but you're going to work with an educational entity to be upskilling that person in the classroom while they're also upskilling in the job site. And so I think that need for talent has shifted the mindset of, okay, we're going to be contributors to this talent market, not just sort of purchasers from this talent market. And so I think that shift has happened, and we're seeing that happen more.
Burton, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so much of what Del said echoes true for us. But what I'll say is, I don't want to understate how much effort and significance it takes to be able to get somebody to take that first leap on the industry side, especially in a new sector, in a non-traditional apprenticeship sector. So we're building off of work that Orion's been doing for years, right? And then Adele and DAS, as well as Irvine Foundation, took a leap in supporting us to be able to build our internal capacity and expertise in selling apprenticeships as a viable talent development pipeline for our industry. And for every one of those leaps that somebody takes, so for our first cohort of 5 employers, every new employer becomes a little bit easier, right? That barrier to entry, or perceived barrier to entry, becomes lower and lower each time. So I think we're reaping the benefits from the foundations that folks here on the panel have set.
Gotcha.
And can I add to that? I echo what has been said already. We are definitely feeling the talent squeeze. But on top of that, once people are entering construction too, they're not sticking around necessarily. Either they didn't know that it was going to be so physical or so hard, or they didn't really have that grit. Like, to be honest, it's pretty tough out there to work in the construction trades. So setting that expectation and educating people of what to expect in construction, that's a big part of what we do. So talent squeeze, retention of apprentices and construction workers, and also what we're facing is a silver tsunami. I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but if you go to a construction job site, you might look around at the workers, and some of them are graying or even more graying. So we're trying to prepare for this wave of retirements leaving the job site by working more with the youth, more of the pre-apprenticeship programs that are already out there. They've been here for a long time. So really kind of preparing for that vacancy in the workforce, and also connecting the people who have already been doing this for a long time. We're lucky that the construction industry, the construction apprenticeship has been there for a while, and there's also employers and contractors who are really into workforce development. There's public agencies and project owners who really want to give more jobs to their community members. And there's unions, and there's apprenticeship programs and pre-apprenticeship programs. There's so many people in the mix, but they may not necessarily be talking to one another. So it's important that we're kind of convening and just kind of sharing our resources, like what are our shared goals and how can we actually implement these goals together. So it's that constant challenge of meeting the labor supply of job seekers, pre-apprentices, and apprentices with the labor demand of contractors, employers, and project owners. So it's making that match finally happen.
Speaking of that, I'm going to jump ahead to one of the questions I had prepared for later, but you mentioned it. There are so many different programs, different apprenticeship programs, different public-private partnerships. A colleague of mine, Adam Eckelman, recently wrote a story about how sort of complicated it all is, right? So if I were a job seeker or a parent of someone who's concerned about what my child might be doing in 5 years, where do people go? And anyone on this panel, please feel free to weigh in. I know there's not there's not a one-stop shop as far as I know, but maybe Adele will tell me something different. I don't know. But anyway, yeah, I would just love for this audience and those watching online to know, where do they go?
So we are the registration entity for the state of California. So we do have a lookup tool. It is not the sexiest thing on the internet, but it is a lookup tool. We aspire to make it better. So dir.ca.gov/DAS. So if you go there, there is an apprenticeship lookup tool, and you can look it up by trade, by sector. So if you're interested in healthcare, you can look there. If you're interested in construction, you can look in that area, and you can sort it by county, so you can see which programs are operating in your region. So there is a lookup tool that interested parents or young folks who are looking to explore apprenticeship can absolutely go check out. Just to be a little humble, where there is a slightly nicer search tool is apprenticeship.gov, and especially in National Apprenticeship Week, I do want to give a shout out to our DOL partners. So apprenticeship.gov is another apprenticeship lookup tool. They've figured out the keyword search better than we have. And so that's a national lookup tool. So you can look up apprenticeships in California and also nationally, just to see what's out there. So those are two search opportunities that if you just want to go peruse to understand what's available, that's certainly a really good resource. And in particular, if you're interested in the construction trades, there's a site that's, maybe you know, it's calapprenticeships.org. Yes? Okay. And they do a really good job of like breaking down what are the different trades. So if you want to just understand like what is a bricklayer versus an iron worker versus an electrician, they do a really good job of doing like sort of profiles of each of those subsectors and then telling you like how much might you make, and you know, so those are just a few entry points that I would offer for finding out more about apprenticeship.
Anybody else on the panel want to weigh in on that?
I can start first. I think this is less informative than Adele, as always, but a little bit more of call to action. Like, it's just going to take a village. There's so much information out there for what potential pathways there are, but I mentioned that I cut my teeth in the K-12 system. I work mostly in continuation high schools, meaning schools where students are credit deficient, they're not on track to graduate, they come to us to potentially earn a diploma or drop out of the education system entirely. So coming in with all that educational trauma, they're not looking for more school after they get done with school. So I always drove them to trades. Go find your local union if you don't want to go to school. If you want to go to community college, let's help you find that pathway. But I didn't know that the industry I work in now existed, right? I didn't know that Texas SF was an option for the students. So it really takes a village to be able to get the word out, especially for the non-traditional work that Adele's really been championing over at DAS, so that other industries that are not typically apprenticeable but are now so can be forefront of students' minds. And I want to thank CalMatters too for putting a spotlight on the issue.
Orion, do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that you can come to us, so Northern California Apprentice Network, and we also have our counterparts in Southern California. But what Burton mentioned, there's a ton of information out there, right? And I think that we all need to do a better job of really kind of amplifying that, because a lot of parents, students don't know about the model of apprenticeship, right? And we need to do a better job of kind of doing some grassroots organizing, and championing this model, because as it stands, there are a lot of opportunities in the more traditional side in terms of demand for apprenticeships, but in the non-traditional, there's not, right? And I think that one of our greatest opportunities is to kind of school every teacher, human resource manager, hiring manager, economic and workforce development practitioner on the model of apprenticeship. And I think we'll really see some traction, because right now when we post a software engineering apprenticeship, within 5 days it'll get 1,000 applications. And so that supply-demand ratio is off right now.
Megan, part of that too is making sure that kids as young as in high school are seeing that, right? Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing there?
Yeah, definitely. When you were asking that last question, I was actually thinking, have you asked your school district, have you asked your college and career counselor about apprenticeship yet? Because they might actually already have the information. The state of California has really uplifted apprenticeship, especially at the high school and college level. And so we're fortunate to be riding that wave. So for example, just this year, we've launched 3 pre-apprenticeship programs in Richmond, in Oakland, and in Livermore. So just this year. And then in January, a community college, Laney College in Oakland, will launch a pre-apprenticeship program there too. So you're starting to see the trades coming back to the classroom. Many of these programs already had shop classes, but we're just kind of bringing in more of the industry, bringing more of the union apprenticeship into the classroom to increase placement after they graduate. But you may already have those resources at your school, but we may not have been asking the question. So a lot of the work that a lot of our organizations have been doing are reaching out to the school districts, the Office of Education, the community college districts to say like, hey, here's apprenticeship, here are the resources. Because again, yes, 100% grassroots, grass tops, but also leveraging the institutions where the people are already like paying attention to. So I hope I answered your question there, but yeah, the high school students love building stuff. Like they love building dog houses. I think, what are they working on right now? I think dog houses are the projects in Richmond, but
Right.
yeah, the kids like it. We just have to make sure they're being safe and are getting their PPE.
And I think it's been a long time coming to start to see like vocational education and re-entering high schools, right? And right now in California, I think 1 in 4 high school kids will go on to finish college, right? And if a college degree is the proxy we use for aptitude to get a good job, then 3/4 of our students aren't on that path right now. And we also spend 100 times more money on supporting people to and through college than we do on apprenticeship, right? So if we start to just educate the educators on what apprenticeship can do for their students, which is direct them to employment, but also pair it with education, it's not this like either or conversation anymore, it's the both and so it's wonderful to see apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship re-entering high schools.
And we've actually been, over the past 2 years, we've been convening the California Youth Apprenticeship Committee to really look specifically at this topic of how do we get more 16 to 24-year-olds into apprenticeship. And the work with that working group really went into 2 subsets. One was looking at in-school youth apprenticeship. So how do we look at creating apprenticeships that can start as early as in high school to create that bridge into a career from high school, and also looking at how are we supporting the opportunity youth, so those that are disconnected from our education system who are 16 to 24, and how do we make sure that they're increasingly aware of the diversity of apprenticeship pathways out there available to them. And so that group just arrived at their final report a few months ago, which we're sort of putting through all the processes, and we hope to be releasing that report soon. But I will say on the high school side of it, since that's what you were asking about, there are some ideas of setting up the potential of a sort of an initial chapter of an apprenticeship that could be started and completed while in high school. And so as we're expanding apprenticeships in a lot of different ways into healthcare, into education, into tech, into all these different sectors, how might we create like a first chapter of the apprenticeship that happens in high school in connection to career and technical education, and in an ideal world, then that apprenticeship is then connected to a community college once that person finishes. And we have a few pilots of that already happening in California. One just recently got registered with us, which is a robotics apprenticeship in Pleasanton Unified School District. They were a recipient of the California Opportunity Youth Apprenticeship Grant, which was a grant that we just announced this summer. And so it's pretty cool. It's going to be a robotics apprenticeship, right? That starts in high school, continues after high school, getting them into college, getting them college credits, which, you know, that even just creating that bridge where they're working and they're earning and they're matriculating into college too, right? Even if it's just, you know, a few college courses, it's still, they demonstrate to themselves like, oh, I can be working and earning and be building that educational portfolio. So a lot of this work is still really new. I would say there's only maybe like 3 or 4 of these pilots out there where there's an apprenticeship that actually is starting in high school. The first one actually was registered in 2020 and has graduated their first apprentices. This is in the San Joaquin County Office of Education. They actually were the program sponsor and the employer. So they filled their own IT help desk needs of the district with high schoolers and had, you know, so anyways, so we've been learning from some of these early pilots, and we're really hopeful for how we can accelerate this work so that we're building these bridges into careers from high schools.
Now, from high schools, let's sort of take it another way, what are you guys seeing in terms of people coming into your program, for example, who are reskilling?
Yeah, I mean, we call that the incumbent apprenticeship model, right? Which I feel like is an underutilized, approach to apprenticeship. We usually are trying to get, people into an industry who have kind of been shut out, right? But right now, with tech changing super quickly, maybe we'll see more of an uptake on the incumbent kind of retraining apprenticeship model. We've done some over the years. We did a cohort of data analysts a few years ago. For the most part, all of these folks are, established techies and are older than what we're driving towards, which is, transitional age youth apprenticeships, et cetera. Yeah.
I will say that when I got into this work of apprenticeship a number of years ago, one of the reasons I got into it was because I was recognizing that our economy is shifting so rapidly, and it's not sufficient to just say, oh, this is my career, this is what I'm going to do for my entire life. I think that we need to come at education and really come at workforce development in a different way as a society, to be thinking about how do we intentionally reskill people, because our economy is going to continue to evolve. We're watching it happen right now with the disruption of AI into tech employment, into professional services employment. It's happening right now. The labor market shifts are really significant, and we need to have mechanisms that allow people to continue to earn and to switch over to become a process technician, or to switch over to become a K-12 teacher, or to switch over to go into whatever the different career demands are. And so I get really excited about this work, both from thinking about opportunity youth and creating pathways into careers, but also thinking about just the health of our overall economy and society is dependent upon our ability to have this infrastructure. And the infrastructure is educators who understand that they're not just educating young people, they're educating adults as well. It's also about employers understanding that I may be hiring a brand new person who is 45, right? They're brand new to my industry, but I'm, they're still a valuable contributing member of this, right? Or, whatever. So I think that we need to, so I see this broader work of apprenticeship as setting up that infrastructure to allow for that career switcher reskilling to happen.
Tell me about it. As someone who, I think my mic died. Oh, okay. As someone who has been a journalist for a lot of years, that's definitely something that's on my mind. What if I have to figure out what to do next? So Burton, are you seeing in the field of semiconductors and in manufacturing and technology, is there a lot of reskilling happening there too?
Yeah, and I think that's thanks to I think employers are open, right? They're open to younger, newer workers, obviously, but they're also open to folks who are reskilling. They're open to their own incumbent workers switching into another role potentially, but we have to provide them the pathways to and kind of illuminate, hey, this can be done with support from other funders, right? So you can weave in different funding. So we're very fortunate to have flexible funding from the California Workforce Development Board, where we build I mentioned this earlier, but an introductory track to advanced manufacturing, but specifically semiconductors. But it's a 2-week crash course with an organization called Job Train, right? Mostly in the South Bay, where we take folks who may be un or underemployed, and then we provide them this crash course because they need to know about this industry. They need to know about potential pathways in advanced manufacturing, and also whether or not it's right for them. Because some of the things that I hear from hiring managers is, I talked to the director of manufacturing at a medium-sized company, and he said, he'll go through interviews, folks just lie through their teeth and say, yeah, I've been working in a clean room before. And if you're not particularly familiar, right, when you go in, you're suiting up in this, what they call a bunny suit, right, head to toe, you're covered. And then in this specific plant, you're also double gloved. So you're doing all these manual tasks with 2 layers of gloves on. And then if you have any type of claustrophobia, this is not the job for you, right? So how do we bring that experience within a 2-week program so that maybe you can say, this is not something I'm going to invest my time in, right? So we have this program, like I mentioned, with Job Train. It's 2 weeks. It's quick, basic skills, basic awareness. But you do get that experience of, let me gown up, let me put on some gloves, so and I know whether or not this is the thing for me. We're also working with Ohlone College to hopefully start that similar track for them. And then through that same grant, as well as the employment training panel in California, finding ways for our member companies to figure out, okay, how do you weave in training funds and subsidize that training for your current workers, right? If you have a need in maintenance techs, but you have this group of operators that you haven't looked at outside of that role, how do you start to upskill them and then weave in state funding in order for you to be able to do that? So there's thankfully lots of different paths in California for us to be able to support our companies.
Can I add to the reskilling?
Sure.
So 2 things come to mind about reskilling. In the union apprenticeship programs, once you complete it and you become like a certified electrician or whatever trade, you actually have access to that training center for the rest of your career. So you can get journeyman upgrade classes. So as new technologies are emerging in the industry, so I don't know, heat pumps or electric vehicles, your training center is providing that training. So you're not obsolete, you're actually learning the new technologies as they come. So the apprenticeship and the unions have that kind of reskilling baked into their program. I also see reskilling at the pre-apprenticeship programs. Just huge kudos to all the staff and the program managers there, but they're working with people who are fresh out of high school, 18, or are on later in their careers, maybe in their 50s. So they're coming in from a bunch of different backgrounds, and the pre-apprenticeship program trains them on how to become a construction apprentice or a construction worker. So we're seeing people who want to reskill, and they've just happened to end up at our pre-apprenticeship program because they've heard of the benefits of apprenticeship.
So if you are not at a high school or a community college and you are an older worker who's looking to reskill, where would you go?
So if you're looking for construction, there's long-established pre-apprenticeship programs that we partner with. The Big Four programs in the East Bay are Cypress Mandela Training Center, Rising Sun Center for Opportunity, Richmond Build, and Future Build. So I think Cypress Mandela has been around since the 1980s. So a very long history. They've really got pre-apprenticeship down. So we're lucky to partner with them and kind of support them in getting their graduates into the trades.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that?
I would just add that from the reskilling perspective, the whole system of workforce boards around the state, around the country, like their mandate is really to, I mean, they have a wide mandate, but included in that is supporting with reskilling. So the sort of 2-week boot camp that you mentioned, that's offered through a workforce board. There are a number of pre-apprenticeship programs in the trades that are offered in collaboration with workforce boards. For example, Valley Build is in Fresno, is another pre-apprenticeship program. San Diego Workforce Partnership also runs a construction trades pre-apprenticeship program. So I would also look to workforce boards in your region to look for some of these like career exploratory short trainings that might be able to allow somebody to check out a particular occupation to say, is this something I might want to do? And I think that those pre-apprenticeship programs run sometimes by workforce boards, sometimes by some of those examples you gave are like independent nonprofits, are great opportunities for that career exploration in a like concentrated time fashion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Adele, for bringing up workforce boards. We can't do our work without our workforce board partners. And then I'll also bring a specific shout out again to Job Train, which is another nonprofit entity in South Bay that provides these reskilling pathways for folks. And they're so good at catering to their audience of workers who really need additional support. So they got RAT supports included within it, and they also have stipended programs, right? So the program that we're going to launch with them in the new year is going to be a stipended 2-week program where we recognize that for folks who are reskilling, there are also barriers economically for them to get that training. So how do we build that in to the programs that we're building?
we have about 5 minutes before we turn it over to the audience for questions, but I wanted to ask whoever on the panel wants to weigh in on a couple of questions that I have related to what might happen under the incoming Trump administration. So my two questions are, how will funding for some of these programs be affected, or are you worried that that might happen? I feel like I was trying to look this up. It seems like the bulk of the money is for a lot of these programs come from the state or are at the state level. But you know, if anyone wants to weigh in on that, I'd love that. And then my second question related to what might happen is about the fact that a lot of the programs we talked about today are meant to address the fact that some of these folks that are taking advantage of these programs have been underrepresented. And as we know, the incoming administration has made a lot of noise about trying to stamp out like DEI. And so if you have any worries about that or want to share your thoughts about that, I'd love to hear it.
Sure. The last administration was very pro-union, so we were relying on a lot of investments from the federal government. And with this new administration, we're not so confident anymore. So for us, we really want to double down on the state and local partnerships and funds that are out there, because we may not have that anymore from the federal level. So in the past, we have gotten funding from the federal and the state levels and the local levels. But now kind of our strategy going forward is just, let's focus on our state, let's focus on our local communities and make something work.
What I can say is that the state of California has and will continue to make significant investments into apprenticeship. And it certainly coming out of this election, I personally was like, gosh, I'm glad I live in California. I'm really happy to be here. I'm always really happy to be here, and I'm extra happy to be here right now. And so what I can say from, you know, you've heard a lot of us mention a variety of different funding sources. Two that I would highlight that are 100% state funded and so are completely not impacted by any of this news. One is the Apprenticeship Innovation Funding, which is formula funding that's going to apprenticeship program sponsors who are running apprenticeship programs. So this is $3,500 per apprentice per year plus $1,000 completion bonus. So we this week are announcing the round 2 recipients of the AIF funding, and we will be opening up another round of that AIF funding in early 2025, and that comes entirely from state funding. So that is unimpacted. And then similarly, we've talked a bit about the Equal Representation in Construction Apprenticeship Grant, which is really looking at supporting those who are underserved to get into the construction industry, and certainly gender representation is one of the significant areas of underrepresentation, so trying to get more women into the trades. And we are going to be opening up a second round of that funding in early 2025, and that's offering funding for recruitment, funding for childcare supportive services, and also a new category to help with worksite culture training. So all of our great efforts here in California continue, and so we continue on with the great cause of California, and I appreciated the opening and the framing of our hosts here in terms of like continuing that beacon of the California dream and keeping it alive with all of the values that we have.
And I'll also add to that our industry association is global, like I mentioned, but my group specifically works more with a national focus, and we happen to have industry clusters across a variety of different states. So I've been very lucky to be able to learn from California colleagues, but then as Adele's mentioning, what can we take for best practices in California and then advocate for those same practices to happen across different states? And then because CHIPS and Science is a federal legislation, we happen to work with the Department of Commerce, the Department of Labor at a federal level as well, and we don't know what's going to happen with that. And we have some proposals that we submitted that are funded by federal entities, and we're not sure where that's going. But we're still going to take this approach of, hey, well, let's take what works and scale it at a national level, where there's no need to reinvent the wheel across the country for building a workforce for an industry that we see is a national security issue. And then if I'm putting my optimistic hat on, I think you've heard from me in this conversation orienting towards industry as a customer. It starts and ends with the industry demand, but all of that is in service of the individuals, right? If we are training individuals and there's no jobs for them to land into, what do we just train them for? So that's still going to be our orientation, where we're learning a lot from our community college colleagues about how do we make sure that we orient to this problem as industry is the customer, but our students and our workers are the clients. And then hopefully we can, again, with the optimistic hat on, keep that language and keep a focus on workforce development and building talent pathways for folks in a way that's more digestible and palatable for other folks.
Orion?
Yeah, the only thing I'd say is that I agree with everything you guys said. The last time that the administration went this way, they tried to kind of water down the registered apprenticeship system. And I think we quickly saw that didn't work, and it didn't serve its end goal of like creating more apprenticeships and helping businesses with workforce development. In fact, registered apprenticeship does that. And so I think we need to just dig our heels in and protect what we can here in California, demonstrate that the model is pro-business. And like the old saying, as California goes, the rest of the country follows. Maybe that'll take shape. But I think it's really just kind of codifying, the registered apprenticeship system and not sidestepping labor.
And if I can just add to that, I also think you guys reminded me we also need to double down on partnerships with the private industry. So I've mentioned a lot of the local and the state public agencies, but our private businesses, they are also another funder, they're also another partner. So I think that's another part of the strategy. We need to double down on private partnerships.
All right. Well, thank you to our panelists. We are now going to open it up to questions from the audience. And Evelyn will walk around with the mic.
I'm interested in the pathway for potential mentors. As somebody who has reached and surpassed middle age here in Silicon Valley, I've seen how brutal it can be to workers over the age of 40 when you see these gigantic layoffs we've had in the past few years. Those typically target older workers who are making a decent wage and hold on to the 25-year-olds, right? And those 40 plus who get out in the workforce rarely find a very welcoming workforce looking for them. And I'm wondering what kind of pathways there are to making those mentors and working with apprenticeships. Ryan, I heard you say there's a supply and demand issue with some of this stuff. Is there a pathway for people who have been pushed out of the workforce at still a young age, I would say, over 40, and are having trouble getting back in besides reskilling? Can they use those years of experience to help the next generation?
Yeah, are you asking specifically around how these folks can support our programs,
right,
just from the outside and
how these people can find pathways to being a mentor?
Sure, yeah, I think starting at the workforce board level is good. I think going through DAS and there's anybody in the apprenticeship space is going to know an organization that needs mentors, right? And that's, I appreciate you asking, because it's hard to find and identify good mentors sometimes. Sometimes people want to be a mentor, it doesn't mean it's a good fit. Starting with us on this panel.
This is not going to be a satisfying answer, but I think you're hitting on a point where this is a very under-leveraged part of our population, right? I happen to be sitting at an organization right now that's trying to build workforce pipelines into an industry that, one of the biggest names, Intel, laid off 15% of their workforce this year. How we're leveraging that institutional knowledge from those folks who are no longer at Intel, but maybe have been for decades, is an open question. where like a mentoring program is a tough nut to crack for us as an industry association. I think we're one of the best positioned to do something like that. So I think you're just hitting on a point that we need to get better at. Yeah.
And I would say, so in the context of an apprenticeship, obviously an apprentice is an employee, right? And they're being mentored on the job, but they're being mentored by somebody that they're working with. So I think, that person is also employed at that organization. So in terms of like the mentorship most directly connected to apprenticeship, I think the example that you're giving, there would not be a use case in that setting. However, I completely agree that there's a lot of great organizations, nonprofits, whether it be the SEMI Foundation, whether it be workforce boards, just to rattle off a few that I know, like NPower, Year Up. There's a bunch of organizations out there that are trying to help get underrepresented folks into tech careers, and they all need mentors. Now, that's not a job. That's a volunteer opportunity. So, but if that's a way that you're interested in giving back, then I think there's certainly a plethora of opportunities to mentor in that way. But I might also think about, we need teachers. We need career and technical education teachers in our school system. So I think that I am very bullish on the care economy. I think it's very unlikely that AI is going to replace a teacher or a nurse, or like these occupations are going to continue to be very much in need. Now, I know they're not always the highest paid occupations. Maybe that's something we should all fix together somehow as well. But that might be something to also consider. I would say being a career and technical education teacher is a career switch that's not, that's learning a new craft of teaching, but leveraging your like long legacy and history of experience in a certain industry. So just to offer a few ideas.
And if you have trouble sleeping, look up how to become credentialed as a CTE teacher in California. It'll put you to sleep, but it's really difficult as a classroom teacher to then shift into a CTE pathway because you're required to have a certain number of industry hours. So it is a good pivot for somebody looking to go back and try to do something different. It is very meaningful. I loved my time in the classroom, but it's also very difficult and rewarding as a result too.
First of all, thank you for sharing your perspective. I learned a lot about how you're developing workforce pathways. My name is David. I'm the CEO of Hope Street. We work directly with high school students in helping them explore careers. And a lot of what you said really resonated. We've seen students explore welding in their high schools, explore healthcare and nursing, and a lot of them want to be teachers. Advanced manufacturing, not so much. That's something interesting to talk about. But one thing I'm curious about is how we're thinking about rural communities and taking advantage of them. So we happen to have the fortunate opportunity to work with a lot of schools in Northern California and Sutter and by the border down in Brawley. And they have really great programs inside their high schools because I get the feeling that maybe locally in their region, it's harder to access things like apprenticeships. So I'm curious to get that perspective.
I'll just say real quickly, appreciate the question. We just entered into a pre-apprenticeship agreement with Calbright Community College, and the point is to provide access to anybody in California, regardless of where you live. And what's interesting with some of the tech apprenticeship programs that we've stood up recently is that the employers are more interested in recruiting from kind of more remote locations, and their reasoning sometimes is, well, folks who grew up here have more of a shot at getting hired in Silicon Valley, so let's actually target recruiting towards rural areas.
And I would just say there's, in the more rural areas, I think that the workforce boards and the community colleges and the universities in those regions end up playing an even bigger role in helping folks navigate career options. And I don't know if there's a particular rural area that you're thinking about, but we recently did a grant to Nortech, which is one of the workforce boards in Northern California, serving one of the more rural regions that's looking to do a bunch with youth apprenticeship. I know that some of the northern the sort of consortium of Northern California community colleges have done some interesting stuff with like forestry apprenticeships. The building trades also have some solid footprint in terms of serving some of the more rural regions of California, certainly like sort of central, like Valley Build is in Fresno, so sort of in more central California. So I think that I would, depending on what rural region you're thinking about, I don't know if you were just asking that sort of intellectually, but those are some of, I think that those groups those entities play more of a role. And also, because employment also tends to be in the school district or in the local hospital or, in some of these occupations. And so so forestry, healthcare, early care and education, these are some of the occupations that we've been seeing be really intentionally developed by those partners.
Hi, this is a great conversation. I have a million questions. I'm going to try to keep it focused. And we've all been talking a lot about the supply side, the workers. And what I'm wondering is, maybe Adele could speak a little bit to the process of, if you're in an industry that sees a need and a demand for workers, what is the timeline and the process for building an apprenticeship program in a specific industry? And I'll tell you why I'm asking. It's something we talked about at the CalMatters Day of Ideas, which is the Infrastructure Act is about to release a bunch of money to broadband build-out projects. And all over the state of California, every county in California is about to get a lot of money to build broadband internet in their communities, and we're really short of workers. So how might they start that program? And how are they starting that program? Because we talked about starting it too.
Okay, so a lot in there. So in terms of developing a new apprenticeship program, I think it depends on like the industry and how you're coming to the conversation. What I will say is an overarching goal that I have is that we at DAS have really been trying to support what we call program sponsor intermediaries. So these are groups that can set up kind of the infrastructure of running an apprenticeship program, and then multiple employers can sign on to that intermediary. So one example is in early care and education, there's an intermediary called ESEPs, and they are serving occupations in early care and education, right? So preschool teacher, bilingual preschool teacher, those kind of roles. And we've seen them, so if you were in the preschool area, I would be like, oh, it's really simple. You don't even need to register a program. You can just go sign up with this existing program. And that's the best, right? Like we're looking to create a whole infrastructure of program sponsor intermediaries so that when an employer needs a semiconductor process technician or needs a teacher or what have you, they can just sign up into an existing program. If there isn't an existing program in a space, then you need an employer at the table who's saying, I want to hire an apprentice. You need an educator at the table who says, okay, I'm going to provide what we call related and supplemental instruction. And if that worker that you're apprenticizing is a represented occupation, so if there's a union involved in that occupation, then they also need to be at the table, and you need to design the apprenticeship. And real talk, like the partnership gathering takes some work, so that has a timeline of its own. Maybe let's say it takes 6 months. The registration process of all agreeing, okay, this is what the apprenticeship is going to look like, and we're going to register it with DAS, can take another 6 months, sometimes a little bit longer, depending. So you're looking probably at least a year, maybe a little bit longer, to get a brand new program from first conversations to approved and launched, right? And maybe longer. There's timelines where that process has taken longer. In terms of broadband, that's more of an example of an occupation that's already being trained by different parts of the building trades. So that's more actually kind of fits into the category of the first category, where like there's programs that are registered and running, and so it's more about like supercharging those programs and building more awareness that like careers in broadband are a great set of careers, and letting people in high school know about those careers and getting them into initial training programs to get them into it. So I think it's going to sort of depend on the scenario as to the timeline to get it set up, but that's a little bit of an intro there. Yeah.
I like it, and I appreciate a thorough answer.
And if I could just add a quick comment, I know we're trying to wrap up. Like, I'll just go do a specific trade, like the electricians. Like, they're hooking us up to the internet, working with the fiber optic cables, all of that. So that's an example, again, of an existing apprenticeship. I think what's key is with a lot of these projects, like there should be workforce requirements or labor standards where you must hire a certain number of apprentices because we want to sustain this pipeline of apprenticeship, right? But then we need to ensure that demand through policy. So with these projects, let's think about, let's hire apprentices, let's give them a job, let's give them their first foot in the door.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you.
And a great way to wrap things up. Thank you all so much for bringing your expertise and sharing this time with us and your ideas. And Levy, yours as well. Levy's been covering these issues for a long time. I especially perked up with the conversation about CTE. We are working on an education program for journalism students and helping journalism teachers qualify for CTE, because that brings more funding into the classroom to do that work, to keep this business going. Very grateful to everybody for being here today, to our friends at Irvine and Smith for funding this, supporting it, not just the grants to support this, but being really good friends and partners to us, especially Don and Mike Smith. Thank you for your help. As I mentioned before, we are a nonprofit newsroom. We rely on your support. If you're inclined, we'd love to have you as a member. We have a daily newsletter called What Matters. If you don't get that, you should be getting it. We think you'll enjoy it, especially if you found this conversation useful. So please sign up for that. Any of us here from the team can get you signed up and give you more information. And we'll be doing a lot more of these kinds of events. So keep an eye on that newsletter for more things like this. One of the things I loved during this was I was watching the online, the stream. And a lot of times we've all been in these things where things drop off. The attendance didn't drop off at all during the hour and a half that we've been here. So I'm credit to everybody for that. And again, thank you all so much for the time, and thanks to everybody for coming.